Hello and welcome to Take Time. I'm your host Patrick Marlett, and let's talk about samurais. Man, it would be awesome if I ran a channel on old samurai movies, but I don't. Unfortunately, today we are only talking about the Seiko Samurai, specifically the SRPB09. That's right, the Blue Lagoon. Now, how on earth did I get one of these, you might be asking yourself? Well, friend and subscriber to the channel, John, lent this one in for me to review. Thank you so much. He bought it ahead of the curve, which was very smart of him. And this is actually one of his first, I'll say, luxury watches, or what he would call one of his first nice watches. And he's absolutely right. It's a very, very nice watch. However, there are a few faults that we're going to talk about on the review today. Now, in regards to this particular Samurai, it's not all that different from the rest of Seiko's Samurai lineup. It's just a limited edition color with a sunburst finish on the dial, and I believe this is the only one with that style of dial. The other ones have a pattern dial. It's sort of like a waffle dial, similar to a Patek Nautilus or the original Samurais for that matter. I am so very excited to share my thoughts and opinions on this beautiful blue beast that we have in front of us. But first and foremost, as you guys know on this channel, I like to start with the bad and then move on to the good before giving you my final thoughts on the piece. So first and foremost, I'd like to talk about the bracelet that's featured on this watch. There's nothing necessarily wrong with the build quality of it. However, I do feel they went with a very basic, bland, recycled design with the oyster link and clasp setup. And here's what I mean. There's a bracelet that's offered by Strapcode. I believe they call it the Hexad Oyster Bracelet. And it's beautiful, and it matches the theme of this watch perfectly. And what do I mean by theme? If you look at the case lines, you'll notice they have these really nice angular edges, and the way it captures your eyes is there's just this industrial feel to it. It's a very beautiful case. But then you look at these lugs, these nice angular lugs that slope down. You even have these end links that match the case design. But then when we move down to the bracelet, you have these curved, brushed, accented by high polished tipped oyster links that just don't match the theme of the watch head whatsoever. It just doesn't look like it belonged to this watch. And I'm kind of disappointed they use this look. I feel like they use oyster bracelets far too often in their designs, Seiko that is. And in this instance, it just doesn't work with the watch. I've been wanting to get a Seiko Samurai for a while now, not only for personal use, but because you guys had been asking me to review it for some time at this point. And I was a little upset when I got the bracelet and it just didn't look or feel right with the watch head. I really feel like Seiko's product should have been Strapcode's product with that Hexad Oyster Link bracelet. It's a really slick looking bracelet. I'll put a picture or I'll put a link in the description so you guys can see it there. I think that would have been a much better design option for them. Instead, it feels like they kind of copped out with the bracelet here. I feel like I've seen this bracelet on other watches of theirs and it doesn't look good with this watch. The next note that I want to mention about this watch, and it was very hard for me to say angular without saying sharp in concerns to the case lines, because the case lines here aren't sharp. They're supposed to look sharp, but they're not. And maybe I'm spoiled because I own a lot of vintage Seikos, like the one that's on my wrist now. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to compare these two so you can see what I'm talking about. But the case lines here look dulled. They look like the watch was, and don't take this the wrong way, like it had bounced around a box. And the edges were sharp at one time, but now they're flattened, they're round. It doesn't look good with the Samurai, and as the name would suggest, you'd expect it to look sharp, have, nice angles to it, have a fine edge. But that's really only something you get from modern Seiko from their upper line of watches, like the Creedor or like the Grand Seiko. And it's kind of a shame because nice case finishing and execution used to be on every single Seiko model. But moving into the 80s up until now, you don't get as nice a case finish, and I'll show you what I mean on the B-cam. So for comparison's sake, I'm going to show you what my 6139 chronograph looks like relative to the Samurai, and honestly, I feel like their cases are extremely similar in overall design. You'll notice those same lugs, how they slope down very abruptly towards the bracelet. You'll also notice how the sides are cut out, they're very similar in their design and their angling. The only difference really being when you look at the top of these cases, these lugs sort of round out as opposed to how these cut in towards the dial. But let's take a look at the Samurai first, and then we'll go ahead and look at the 6139. You'll notice how those edges have a sort of rounded off appearance to them. They look sharp on camera, but in person, they're kind of flat. They're kind of dull. You know, I can't feel them. When I rub my fingers along the edges of this case, they feel like, they feel childproof. They feel like the child-friendly version of what a samurai should be like. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's like when you need rounded edges around all your tables to make sure every, infant in the room is safe. That's what this case design feels like. Whereas opposed to this, oh man, this thing is brutal. Like, look at those edges. Look at how sharp these lines are. Even on the lug tips. And by the way, guys, I didn't refinish this watch. I kept my 6139 in its original condition. This isn't a repolished edge. This is a late 70s model, and it still looks this sharp and defined, and it's crazy. But you can see exactly what I'm talking about. With the case lines here, they were just executed better. And, back in the day, this wasn't, a high-end watch for them. This wasn't some upper-tier watch. This was just like the standard issue model, sort of like what this is. I'd say these are two consumer-friendly models from the brand. This one obviously from the 70s, this one modern. But you'll notice that the edges just aren't executed as well. And maybe I'm spoiled, but it's a little bit of a disappointment. Because when I hear the name Samurai, I expect the watch to have an edge, and it's dulled. That was a long rant. We're going to keep that take, because you know what? I think I said mostly what I wanted to say about the edges of this case. It was the first thing I noticed when I met up with John and I looked at the watch. I'm like, oh, it's a really great looking watch, but the case, it just felt like it was lacking in some way, and it's because those edges had been dulled, for lack of a better word. I don't know why the case looks like this. It's a little bit of a disappointment, but it doesn't detract from the overall quality of the watch. Now, the last major issue I have with the Seiko Samurai series is on the dial face itself, and it's a common complaint you'll hear tossed around about dive watches in general, and that is the date window. Specifically for me, I understand, I feel like a large majority of us don't want date windows on our dive watches. They're always there. But I don't care one way or the other. If you're going to do it, please execute it well. I don't think the date window here was executed well at all. So when I look at the date window on a watch, I want to see two things. I want to see either the date window standing alone by itself, neatly framed, or I want to see the date window standing alone by itself without the addition of some quarter or 1/5 loom plot filling up the space beside it. Because to me, it just looks cheap. It kills the overall design of the watch when you have this rectangular frame next to a loom plot that just doesn't feel necessary anymore. It's just a bad look. It just was not executed well here. What would have been really great, in all honesty, is if the cutout for that date window matched the frame of the 6 and 9 hour marker. If they extended the top and bottom lines to meet that weird loom plot off to the side, I think it would have looked better. What might have even looked greater than that is if we just took the date window out in general. It would have looked so much better on this watch. It's a sore thumb. It's such a sore thumb having to look at that date window, and it's not executed well in my opinion. I would have much preferred if they put it between maybe, I don't like it at all, but the 4 and the 5, and have the wheel itself blue so it blends in with the dial, and maybe have the numerals in white. Ugh, man, date windows drive me mad, guys. They really do. I hate seeing them executed poorly. I feel like every watch, and here's sort of what I mean. Seiko used to frame every date window on their watch because they knew this execution looked worlds better It looks so good when your day and date or your date window is framed. When it's not, and then there's this weird, it looks like a 1/5 loom plot on there. It just looks like it was a secondary thought, but it's on every single model, so it wasn't. This is what they thought would look good. It just it kills me. Date windows just can either make or break a watch dial for me, and the one here is so on the verge to breaking the watch for me. Come on, Seiko. Can you know what? Do a date version and then do a dateless version, because I bet you just watch the numbers. You're probably going to sell more of the dateless version. God, I am ranting more than I usually do today, and maybe that's because I've been considering this watch, and I'm still considering getting one of these watches. It doesn't sound like I like it. Trust me, I do. Why don't we move on to some of those good notes so you can see how much I enjoy this watch. So the first good note I want to mention is actually about the bracelet. Although I don't feel it aesthetically matches the theme of the watch. It doesn't have the nice angles the case does. It has these weird curved oyster links. Whatever. It sizes and wears extremely well. It's one of the better bracelets, and right around the same price, getting a Seiko Turtle or this bracelet is better than the Seiko Turtles. It doesn't have those wobbly end links, I feel, that plague that model. One of the reasons you always get the rubber strap option as opposed to the bracelet. These end links fit perfectly, really. No wiggle whatsoever. They match the lines of the case perfectly. And again, the bracelet is very easy to size and very nice to wear. Now, before I move on with the rest of my good notes, I want to share what this watch looks like on the wrist. Here is what it will look like for all of your admirers, and when you go to admire it yourself, it's going to look a little something like this. Now, while we're looking at this wrist shot, I'm going to go ahead and get those dimensions out of the way for you. I measured this up myself, and from what I could tell from lug to lug, it is approximately 48.5. It has a 22 millimeter lug width. It is a 13.5 millimeter thickness, and it fits really nice against the wrist, as you can tell. And lastly, it's about 44 millimeters in width. Now, mind you, the bezel itself is a little bit wider than the rest of the case, so that may manipulate the results if you're measuring this watch yourself. But I measured about 44 millimeters in width. I don't know if that lines up with everyone else, but it actually wears much smaller than that. It wears more like a 41 because of the way the case is shaped. And of course, I'll show you what I'm talking about on the B-cam. But of all the Seiko divers of recent date, this is one of the finer wearing models. It feels really good on the wrist, the watch head in particular. Seiko has a magical way of producing their cases that just makes them fit your wrist nicely, and they did a really, really stellar job with this watch. And you can actually see what I'm talking about here as we look at the profile. You'll notice that, similar to the Reese's Cup, it actually slopes down and the overall width of the base becomes smaller. And it wears extremely well due to this detail. The way they design cases is just absolutely amazing. That's why I'm a Seiko fanboy. I really do love their case designs in general. And this, honestly, is one of their new staple cases because it's been around for a couple different iterations, I believe. The earlier models used a 7S26, if I'm not mistaken. There was a titanium model. I think there were 3, including this model, this modern one. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Obviously, I almost bought a white Samurai, and then I heard these were coming out. I wish I did, because the prices on all those vintage Samurais have gone up despite the movement being improved in these newer models. And if you were looking to get a Samurai, I would highly encourage you to see if you can check one out locally. I believe these are bigger than the previous ones, but they do have the same case style as those previous ones. That much is certain. Now, while we're looking at the beautiful watch face on this blue Lagoon, I'm going to talk about some of the case materials that went into this. It has a 4-arm movement inside of it, which is hacking and hand winding. Hard Lex crystal, even on this limited edition version of the watch. On the front, we have a 316L stainless steel case and bracelet. I absolutely love the knurled grip and crown action of this watch. It is one of the nicer crowns, but what really got me giddy about the Samurai when I first picked it up was the bezel on it. The bezel's action is amazing. It's worlds above the consumer-friendly dive watches, the other ones in Seiko's range, as far as quality and action is concerned. And as a matter of fact, it kind of rivals the Marine Master 300 to me in terms of the overall density of the turn and the precision you can get with this bezel, whereas the Turtle or the SKX have sort of a tinny sound to them. They're typically very loose. You can fix that, I'm sure, if you wanted to. But out of the box, all of the SKXs and Turtles I've received have a very loose action to them. This one has a nice, dense turn. You can hear those clicks. It's very deliberate. Again, it feels like I'm operating a Marine Master 300, although I would still say that bezel is better because it was still easier to turn. This one is just a little bit more dense than an MM300, and I'm still making up heads or tails whether I enjoy this one more than that. But from my experience with it thus far, one of the better affordable Seiko divers for the bezel action, hands down. Like I was stating earlier, this is definitely becoming another staple dive watch in Seiko's large collection of dive watches, and it's very much a welcomed case model to the collection. It's so unlike the rest of their other divers, which aren't as angular. They're more rounded, especially the Turtle, which is growing even more and more popular. More models are coming out for that watch, whether that's good or bad. It's insanely popular, and it has those classic like rounded sides and radial brushing on top, where this is very rugged and again angular in its styling, and I quite like it because it diversifies their range quite a bit. It's such a welcome diver into their collection. I have to say I honestly prefer the sunburst dial on this particular Samurai as opposed to the waffle patterning or the matte finish of the orange Samurai variant, the modern Samurai variant. And fortunately, they don't do any other watches, if I'm not mistaken, any other Samurais with this style of dial. This is the only way you can get it, and it's a little bit expensive. However, the rest of the Samurai range is still really great. If they're anything like this watch, and I actually had an opportunity to test out a handful of them. John himself actually has 2 of them because he enjoys them so much. And the bezel quality, everything else is quite the same amongst the models. This one is pretty fantastic though, and it was a really good purchase, John. If you guys were interested in getting one, it's a really good purchase. So if you were stepping up the Seiko dive watch ladder, this is a really good watch in their range, and I think it's one that'll suit you for years to come. It's really, really slick watch. I love the overall styling. I like the fit. I like the sizing of it. Again, enough micro adjustments to make it super comfortable on any wrist size. I would prefer a Hexad Oyster bracelet. Maybe Seiko will catch on and produce their own for future models. Very doubtful. But, if I can find one on the used market for myself with a Hexad bracelet, I'd totally be down. At any rate, gang, if you found this video useful or in the least entertaining, feel free to hit that like button. It looks a little something like this. If you have friends, forums, or groups that were interested in picking up the Seiko Samurai and they wanted the opinion of another consumer who's also on the fence about getting one of these watches, maybe share this video with them and we can have a chit chat as to whether we should buy it or not, or maybe we can share a forum post on good sales for these, because I'm totally down to buy a used one and just like have it pressure tested and regulated and getting a Hexad Oyster bracelet, because it is such a cool watch. I might shapen up the case lines though. Other than that, it's pretty good, man. And lastly, if you are new around here, welcome. I do 2 videos a week centered around watch content. So if that's your thing, maybe hit the subscribe button. And while you're down there, there's a bell icon you can hit too, and that'll alert you when my videos come out. Again, my name is Patrick Marlett, and thank you for the time.